Hello, and welcome to Fahrenheit AI episode 23. Recently, I was on the shirt show, and Dylan called me the three-eyed raven. That inspired me to make a new piece of artwork. We're also going to look at Adidas AI-generated video, fake AI, and data scraping. So, the three-eyed raven came from Game of Thrones. The character is over 1,000 years old and based on a seer, which can see into the future and understands things that are unknown. I looked up what the original Game of Thrones artwork style is so that it could be incorporated as reference. I went to my AI tools, MidJourney and Ideogram, and I looked for three-eyed raven. I was focused on texture, silhouette, and the tone of the image that I wanted to create. I'm using AI as an inspiration, not as a sole development. MidJourney did pretty well, but it had a tendency to put the third eye hanging over the head of the bird. I did find some cool textures eventually that I collected. Then I started looking for the silhouette. I used a style tuner inside of MidJourney to expand my choices for tone, but I ended up letting the idea of tone go until the end. I thought that I could inspire the idea, but everything was very monochrome. I wanted something more colorful for a digital application. Finally, I found my silhouette, and this came from a photoreal generation out of MidJourney that I really liked. I used that along with my texture reference to start my build. When I do a build out like this, it generally saves me a big chunk of time. If this artwork would have taken me 40 hours to draw by hand, I used heavy AI generation in this particular artwork, and it took me about 40% of that time. Normally, I will use AI inspiration and some generative tools and keep drawing a large amount of it because I enjoy the process. In this case, I really wanted to experiment training the AI into what I thought it could generate. That means taking tiny little steps. Let's take a look at an Adidas commercial. This is not real. This is a mock-up, but this could be, in the future, the kind of commercials that we will see.
What makes us unique is our passion for what we do. We walk with purpose in every step. Doesn't matter who you are. We all have the power to change the world. Every obstacle is a fresh start. Every fall teaches us something new. Together we break any limits, and we're ready for the challenge.
First, I built my reference page with my silhouette and my texture. Then I went into Illustrator and I started building out my bird. I started creating feathers. I took image trace of my texture reference. I extracted a feather that I liked. I smoothed it and simplified it until it had a shape that I liked. Then I went back and I drew in the individual pieces of the feather to give it some definition. Then I went through and identified highlight, 3/4 tones, 1/4 tones, and dark, low lights on each feather so that it had a dimensional shape. When I was finished, I took it over into Photoshop. I gave it the correct color story. I applied it into my bird draw out. Now you can see what I'm doing is going in and defining individual feathers in the tail and in some of the flight feathers in the wings. These are kind of large feather areas that I want to define so that I can get a detailed image of this three-eyed raven. I also drew the face of the raven in Illustrator. Some of it involved repeating the feathers in multiple places. I wasn't really concerned about this because I was going to be using generative tools to make them more individual. I'm just defining the space so that the AI has references to generate from that I like. I added a lot of shadows and tonal areas of light so that there would be a lot of depth in the final generation. Then I started individually generating feathers based on what I had already placed. I would select one of the feathers that I had drawn in Illustrator, and then I would just generate a feather on top of it so that it would be more unique, more individual, a little bit different than the other side. Then I would select areas that I had not created vector feathers in, and I would generate new feathers. The generative tool would reference the other feathers that I had already placed. I went through and I continued to build out the tail feathers and the flight feathers along the wingspan. Donald Trump recently posted about Taylor Swift supporting him for president. These are AI-generated images, and this is not true. I don't know if the intention was to dominate the news media for a cycle or confuse people that don't understand what AI is, but this is the kind of thing that can happen with AI-generated images and mass media. The Olympics also used AI, and you could build out in Peacock a daily update based on your interests relating to the Olympics.
Rundown of yesterday's most thrilling Olympic moments. Catch up on everything from the games on Peacock.
NVIDIA has gotten in trouble for flagrantly scraping data from YouTube. The practice has clearance at the highest levels of the company. They are scraping up to 80 years worth of videos per day. Once I had a lot of the flight feathers defined, and even though I was still repeating, I created some variants with the generative tools and was starting to get larger chunks of generative feathers that were matching to what I had already drawn. I continued to just build out the flight feathers underneath one step at a time. And then I repeated the image on the opposite side. I had most of the flight feathers and the tail feathers built, but I was missing the wing tips and some of the second and third row of feathers in the wings. I actually started selecting those areas and using the scientific name for those feathers and asking for that generation. I was working on the feathers at the tips of the wings. I was generating individual feathers that were matching in style, but using Firefly instead of the generative AI tool. If I give Firefly the reference of the rest of the bird or one of the feathers, it would generate feathers that were similar, if not matching, to the existing feathers, but different enough that it added some new texture. I extracted those feathers, I cut them out, and I applied them across the wing tips and to the tail feather. Then I went back and made the selections for the second and third layer of feathers in the wings. I gave the generative tool the names of those feathers to help define that they were shorter and they were tucked behind these longer flight feathers. That helped the tool generate more accurately what I was looking for. When I had the bird fleshed out well enough that it was close to my reference combination with texture and silhouette, I used the entire bird as the image for the generation of new wings. The generative tool did a really good job creating things that were tonally similar in silhouette, similar in texture, but more finished. When I found a wing that I liked, I extracted it and I rebuilt my wings using that generation. So essentially, I trained the AI with my artwork on what I wanted it to generate as a final result. I did the same for the tail feathers, the beak, and in the end, I still had to generate some of the tail feather because the feathers that I found were missing the center part at the bottom. So I went back and I generated individual feathers for that space. Oddly, the generation came out in negative, so I just inverted it, added some shadows, and tucked it. And the final result was better than I could imagine. Thanks so much, you guys.
It's the end of